This is a pretty flexible organisation, members, because as you've heard, the main speaker can't be here today, and now the mini speaker knew about 10 minutes ago that I was going to be the mini speaker. So I suppose you've got to be fairly adaptable. On the board is a thing about lost and found, but before I get on to that, I was in another life an apprentice builder and eventually became a builder. I started my trade in Kalgoorlie, and after the war there were a lot of buildings that were surplus to requirements. Now, because they were built by the Commonwealth or the Defence Department, they were well built, and for quite some time after the war there were severe restrictions on all building materials. You just couldn't go and buy a bag of cement or lengths of timber or angle iron or something like that. So buildings that were well built were sought after by various people, including the mines in Kalgoorlie, who bought some of the hangars from the Kalgoorlie airport where they were situated, and probably had to purchase them through the Defence Department. I'm not quite sure of the mechanics. As an apprentice, I had to accompany my boss on various building sites, looking at these buildings and wondering how we could transport them and re-erect them on another site. So even when I shifted down from Kalgoorlie to Perth, the same applied. And before I get onto the Catalina hangar, there was something that really captured my imagination regarding building trade and World War II and aircraft and buildings. Up in Kalgoorlie after the war, there were a number, I think a whole squadron of multi-engines aircraft were scrapped. The RAF just sort of ended them there, and a couple of people that flew them tried to negotiate to buy a couple to maybe get them flying again. The RAF moved in and butchered them up, cut the engines off with oxy torches and smashed everything on them that would make it a flyable aircraft. They were eventually purchased, the main part of them being melted down, but the oleo legs came down here to Perth. And I had the opportunity, still with my boss who moved down here, to go down to one of the bull sheds on High Street in Fremantle, and there was some mezzanine floors at a height that was not satisfactory. They wanted them a lot higher. So there were about 20 oleo legs from the Volvo engines put in such a pattern under the floor with planks and beams and so forth, a big oil tank and the hydraulics connected, and about pushed up in the old measurements about 6 inches a time. They had the legs deflated, the oil came in, they all went up at the same time, and up the whole mezzanine floor went. It was then secured on a temporary basis. The legs were lowered, some blocks put in, and up they went, and up they got up about 2 feet to 2 foot 6 higher than what they were on the aircraft legs. And so it was quite an interesting exercise from a byproduct of World War II. Now, down at Crawley Bay, there were some very big steel hangars erected. I'm not quite sure whether the Americans put them up or whether they were put up here under specifications in Western Australia. The top one shows the original shed as it was, and I think there might have been 2 of them. There we go. And it shows a cantilever coming out each I suppose side, not end, each side of the shed. And I can still remember as a kid seeing the Catalinas parked under there, not entirely, but the main part under the actual Catalina, the cantilever type roof. So there they were, and then they served for the whole period of the war. And of course, like all things, the war ended, and what do you do with the buildings? Well, they were purchased, and one of them, okay, there's even a measurement on there of 26 metres. Now, this is interesting in a moment, you'll hear why. I was taken down there once, I think with someone that had in mind to do a shift of these buildings, and we went into great detail on how it could be achieved. And although I was not involved in the actual shifting of it, and I would have liked to have been because it was quite a challenge being quite a large building, someone else got the contract, and I believe they really didn't allow enough money to shift the building from where it was in Crawley. And one of them is still in existence down in South Fremantle. And there it is today, well, about a fortnight, 3 weeks ago. Now what's happened, the cantilever part has been filled in. It's still the same measurements, and Brian Hernan, in Brian Hernan's usual way, wasn't quite sure the building I was talking about was indeed a Catalina shed. but by doing some scaling on his computer models or however, using the height of the doors as a base, it is indeed one of the Catalina sheds. So although we're in the age of recycling today, this is not new, this has gone on for quite some time. The building is occupied by a panel beater, and I have tried over the years to get in and have a look, but ran into resistance in that particular department because they didn't want a stranger snooping around whatever they were doing inside the building. Now it's a panel beater, and the fellow that I spoke to about 3 weeks ago probably knew it was a Catalina shed, which was a great help. I assured him I was not an industrial spy checking on what cars he might have had that he was repairing, but genuinely interested in taking a couple of photos. And he agreed, and he didn't want the whole world coming down, so I thought I'd take a couple of photos and share it with all of you. So you can see a little bit of the cantilever on the end. It's been filled in the other end, and originally I think it had asbestos on it, corrugated asbestos, which is now sheeted with iron. And so there's some internal shots that Brian's got here, and there it is. There's a lot of engineering has gone into that, but apparently the owner of the building, and it's not the panel beater, he leases it, had a lot of trouble convincing the Fremantle Council that the steel truss work was self-supporting in the whole 28 metres, and to allow him to get use of the building, to have people working underneath under modern day standards, they had to install these posts, which is a complete overkill because it stood up through the war with aircraft under it without any posts. The steel work, and that's what it is, all looks to be in perfect condition, must have been treated to prevent rust, but they couldn't get permission unless they put all those steel posts in. I would be almost sure that if I got an engineer, a structural engineer, to run out the calculations, you wouldn't need the steel posts. But in today's world, things have changed, and so you'd have to do it. There's another view, I think, of internal, giving you the steel post again, and the parallel trusses above and the rafters of steel forming a sort of a gable roof type situation. Wind braced all over the place to withstand strong winds, and to my knowledge they never had any problem down at Crawley, and they certainly, this remaining building hasn't had any problems since it's been there. It's just a bit of a pity that the other one seems to have disappeared. It might have got cut up for scrap, which I guess is recycling. But it's interesting to think that all these years after World War II, at least one of the Catalina hangars, and now we have, of course, a real Catalina at the museum down there at Bull Creek, and if it were possible, and it won't happen, that particular aircraft could be under the shed where these were made for that purpose. So recycling is not new. The hangar is still in, the building, we'll call it now, is still in good condition. The panel beater fellow, an Italian name, was very helpful when I told him I'm a member of this group and we like to talk about things of the past. And so he let me go down and take those photos both inside and out, and I promised him that I wouldn't take any photos of the stock that he had underneath. And to show that I was positive, after I'd taken the photos of the digital camera, I went in to show him, but he took me at face value and said, no, you promised you wouldn't do it, and I'm sure you haven't. And I hope that your group that you're talking to enjoy what it is that we're talking about. So that's a mini speech that I didn't know I had to do, and I hope you're interested enough perhaps to know that even some of the buildings, including aircraft, and I spoke about my Jeep of some time past, are still around. Perhaps not as many as there were 60, 70 years ago, but there's still some there. It's because of their top grade workmanship that they have survived to this day. Thank you everybody, I hope that's of some interest.